Hello and welcome back to Real Tax Talks with Michael Coronado. I am happy to introduce everyone today to Bruce Stein, who's joining us from sunny Southern California. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Anything?
Well, Michael,
anything?
first of all, thank you for letting me join you today, and hopefully we can depart a few tidbits of wisdom to your followers.
Awesome. So, I know we spoke briefly kind of before we got started, and you've mentioned, different real estate ventures. Would love to get some insight into, what got you into real estate and, where it's gotten you today.
What got me into real estate is when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect. So I kind of pursued that through college. But while at college, I was an architectural coordinator, and I fell in love more with development than architecture. So I moved from Detroit to California, and I started working for a land use consultant. And I was seeing how developers were taking vacant land and entitling them. And I started working for a real estate syndicator who was developing office buildings, shopping centers, apartment buildings. And I just kind of fell in love with it, and then went from hopefully a better paying job to a more important job, and ended up working for a family office where did some large $100 million development projects, raised three $100 million real estate funds. I was running a home building company for a short while in the Southeast, building homes in Memphis, Charlotte, and Jacksonville. We were building about 1,300 homes a year. I built the first new motion picture studio in Los Angeles. I ran that for about 4 years. Big variety of things, and I worked for a private debt fund for 10 years doing bridge and construction financing nationwide. And then I pivoted because I didn't want to work 80 hours a week and started doing just real estate consulting, primarily with real estate investors who either want to grow their portfolio or are at the age where they want to retire and they have to figure out what they want to do with their real estate from an exit plan.
Okay. That's amazing. That's definitely an eclectic career, and
Yeah.
it's not related, but it caught my interest, and I'm sure other folks might if they heard the same thing. You developed a movie studio, and then were you still in the were you actually more involved in the motion picture portion of it, or afterwards did you stay on as still just kind of helping sets and things like
I
that?
was just managing the studio. We had tenants that were doing the largest tenant was David E. Kelly, and at the time he had Ally McBeal, and he had the practice Boston Legal, and then a couple others, and so they were on the studio filming in the stages, and it was my job just to make sure everything was good. So
Okay.
it was close to movies and television as I got to. Yes.
So instead of managing tenants of like Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks,
Yeah.
managing
Yeah. Only I
the
was managing David Kelly. Yeah.
That's amazing. So you got to meet Callista at some point, I
Yes.
guess. I'm dating myself, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. That's a
And
that's
William Shatner. That was the biggest treat. Yeah.
yes.
Because he
That
was on Boston Legal. Yeah.
oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. So it definitely afforded you other opportunities outside of
Yeah.
just strictly real estate. So that's amazing. Uh, you spoke a little bit about, as kind of in your journey, what sparked, you started in architecture. It's interesting. I see a lot. I notice a lot of people start in architecture and then somehow work their way still into something related. Uh, and then as you were kind of going through the different development groups, you were helping raise capital. So tell me a little bit about that. How difficult was it? How have you seen it change, and are we in a different place today?
Well, I think first of all, if you're going to go raise capital, you need to first of all have a good track record. So a lot of times you're having to do a lot of one-off deals to show, okay, here's how I executed. Here's, here is the whole plan going from A to Z. How do you financed it? Who were your original investors? What your assumptions were? And then once you've got that track record, then you can go out and hopefully attract more institutional clients. And when I was at the family office, we were doing a lot of smaller office buildings. We were doing investing in apartments. So we knew how to invest. We just were doing it with our own money and some friends' money. And then we decided, let's go out. So it was gruesome, a lot of traveling when you're going around the country, going to all the different, you know, public pension funds and things like that. And so it's like, it was a dog and pony show. But you raise your money, and what they were always looking for is alignment. So they wanted to make sure, as the manager, that we had enough capital committed too. So if something went wrong, we had something to lose as well. And then you had to make sure that your you know your projects. So we created an investment committee, because this is what institutional investors wanted to see is, it's just not two people deciding what's going to pass as an investment. So we kind of created an investment committee. I mean, I sat on it because I was, a key man, but so it's, going there, but then, it's managing expectations afterwards, sending out quarterly reports, making sure they're in on everything. And that part wasn't as much fun, but because it's just you want to do the next deal, but you still got to report on what's going on. But then you get successful with that, then you realize, okay, I'm going to go to another fund. The interesting thing is we turned down a lot of investors because they wanted us to do a larger fund, because they want to put in 25 million. They don't want to be, let's say, more than 10%. So that's a real key, is knowing what your limitations were. We were concerned, could we invest $100 million in 3 years, which is what we wanted to do? And a lot of the institutional investors said, no, do 250. And we didn't feel comfortable. So we had to say no to a lot of the bigger clients. So sometimes you have to know when to say no and say, I can't, because it will hurt them, it will hurt you as a fund manager if you're too big, and then you're coming back and saying, we just can't commit, can't invest the capital, so we're going to release you from your commitment. It doesn't look good. So it's better to be able to turn around after 2 years and say, we invested all our money, now we're going to fund two, which is what we did. And then you learn that, okay, now we want to maybe try something different. So the first two funds were really providing mezzanine and preferred equity for development deals. And a lot of it was at the time going into properties that were environmentally sensitive. So, how you develop them. Mm-hmm. And then we decided we wanted to try hospitality. That was, and because hotels were doing very well. So then we started buying hotels, and ended up buying around the country. Like you're in Miami, we bought a hotel in Miami, bought a hotel in Tampa. We were around, and that was fun. But again, you just learn your limitations, and that's the key. And the one thing is, as accountant, you know that it's like you could tell people what your before tax return is going to be, but a lot of people are also concerned about what their after tax return is. So, how much depreciation are we going to get? Are you going to do cost seg so you can accelerate depreciation? Those are some real big benefits when you've got large projects to be able to turn around and say, hey, we're going to be able to give you a big write-off in the first year, the second year, because we're accelerating depreciation. So a lot of investors appreciate that you use, as much at your advantage as possible, and setting up amortization so that you can, because everybody wants to know what is my after-tax return. Nobody, yeah,
Yes. Absolutely. No, and it's great that you mentioned that. That's it amazes me because you mentioned about big investors, but even smaller, high income, high net worth folks, individual investors, they're also concerned about their tax situation, right? And it amazes me because I speak to a lot of different people all over the U.S. and there's a number of folks who, because they work with we talk about knowing limitations, and talk to a generalist accountant, a tax advisor who doesn't understand real estate, who doesn't understand cost segregation studies, that doesn't understand the value of these things, and then they're leaving money on the table where they're having good years and they want to take advantage of these things and have, because once the year's done, you can't go back and say, let's take this back, right?
Yeah.
You can, yes, there are some exceptions, but in general you can't, right? So
Yeah.
you have this ability to take this loss this year, or this paper loss, right? Because it's depreciation. Let's do it. Let's get the bonus. Let's do this, and let's move forward with, the benefit that we want for the following years, and having that tax benefit, having the cash flow moving forward, and then deal with the out parts of that. It's also interesting because you talked about the scale, right, and knowing where you land. I was going to ask. I just kind of have a two-part question because you mentioned, going from the individual to kind of show, hey, we've done this. We did 5, 10, guessing 5, 10, $15 million deals self-funded. Now you did this larger fund for 100 million. Now you're like, okay, we've done this. Here's our track record. When you went from the lower amounts to the larger projects, is there a bigger benefit that you see with a higher dollar value? I mean, there's a bigger risk, right? But is there a bigger benefit for the higher dollar values, or is it just that, I don't know, constructing an 8-unit building is the same as constructing an 80-unit building? I don't know. I'm curious.
For a larger project, obviously, there's, more money at risk, but at the same time, you're not competing with as many people. So I think if you have a property that you can get entitled and you're building an 80-unit or 100-unit apartment building or a 400,000 square foot industrial building, the scale, who your tenants are. So a lot of times we would not start construction unless we had a tenant occupying the space. We were not going to take on a risk and say we're going to build something and be on spec. But that was not something we wanted to do. We would maybe acquire a property that had vacancy, but we would feel, okay, here's where the market is, and we can fill in the vacancy as we do the renovations. But we were not that risk-prone to just do a spec building. The key benefit of having a fund versus one-offs is you have the commitment. So you can be working on the second deal and not have to be out fundraising every time you do it. So that's a real key. So a lot of times I'm working, when I was doing lending, I was working with a lot of fix and flip operators. And they were coming to us and doing one deal at a time. And finally they said, you're doing a whole lot of deals, and why don't we give you a line of credit instead? So it's, you've been borrowing all this, but why don't we'll just say, we'll give you $10, $15 million, and then you can come to us. All you got to do is fill out these 4 questions, and then the debt's there, and it allow you to, acquire properties a little bit quicker, be a little bit more competitive because you know the debt's there, because they can always find the equity. And then it was the key for is do you fix and flip them? Do you fix and hold them? And then that was a different strategy that I would, so even though I'm a lender, I'm working with my borrowers to say, here's your strategy. Maybe keep a few of these. This is how you build your wealth, because all you are really is you're acting as a general contractor. You're getting a fee. You're getting a promote when you flip the home, but you're creating a great income, but not wealth. So I would help them, and that's when I really started enjoying the consulting side a lot more even than the lending side, is to help them understand, this is how you can build wealth, and just start keeping a little bit of your real estate instead of selling everything.
Absolutely, and that's interesting because I get talked to people as well as that who are looking at. I'm looking at, I'm doing fix and flip, and they're not thinking about the tax, right? What's my after-tax return, as you mentioned earlier, right? Yeah. And with a fix and flip, you potentially have a higher tax bill without necessarily you're impacting your ability to build wealth, right? Unless you're using a tax advantage or tax deferred vehicle, with solo 401k or self-directed IRA that you're able to do these things, you're basically now lowering the amount of capital that you have for the future, whereas opposed to the buy borrow die that some people advocate, right? Hold on to it, just borrow against it, and use that capital for the next one instead of selling. So there's definitely the opportunities with that, and I think that it also goes to I think taxes and in general are a black box for folks, right? And it's not that you have to understand it 100%, but if you're going to go and undergo heart surgery, you want to at least have an idea of what's going on under the hood. You're going to do what, and you're going to do this. Okay, now I've got a general idea. Can I do it myself? Absolutely not. But I've got this idea. I have this understanding of how it works basically, so then I could go forward and make my decisions and do those types of things.
Yeah, it's interesting as you get older and you keep your real estate. And I've had some clients come to say they're complaining because, I'm paying too much money in income taxes. And then you look at their portfolio and you said, well, you've pretty much fully depreciated your assets. You've got very little debt, so you're not, you've got income and you got to report it. And I said, this is where you've got to start looking at a strategy and saying, okay, I don't want to pay capital gains, but okay, let's sell this property because it's really fully depreciated. Now let's do a 1031 exchange, and now you can then, start your depreciation over, do a cost seg, get some accelerated, get a little bit more debt, and now you're creating a different kind of income stream, but you're also taking advantage of depreciation and some interest write-offs. But the big thing is I've seen is I've been brought in with heirs who've inherited a property, and of course they get a step up in basis, so they don't have to worry about the capital gains. They forget about doing cost seg studies. They forget about that there's some tax advantages that they can help cover, and they're going by, and it's like all they're saying is, how do I manage it and what to do with it? But I said, but meanwhile, go out and get these. You can go back a couple of years, so let's do it, and then figure out what to do with the properties. But a lot of times, these heirs are unprepared to take over a property if the patriarch or the matriarch passes away suddenly, and there's nobody really who knows the business and can step in, and that's the sad part.
That is, and it's funny. I think you said two really important things there. It's cost segregation. I think we keep underscoring that. I think a lot of people don't understand it. So it's just basically taking depreciation that you would have done normally over 27 and a half years or 39 years, that was flat across those years, and doing some of that earlier on based on the actual usable life of these things. So there's 5, 10, and 15-year property, and then in some cases you could do bonus and do 100% the first year. But so that's like really strong. And then the second part, which is, if you're not involved, right, it makes it a lot more difficult. And I see that as well, right? I forgot now who it was, but there was a gentleman who, he said, his family, they have a family enterprise meeting, board meeting, and they talk about, and each child has money to, and they pitch their idea about investing, and obviously age appropriate, right? You're not going to have your 5-year-old because they're going to invest in an ice cream shop. but if they're age appropriate, you start talking about, how do we invest this money, bring them in to understand and form part of it. And I think those are really important. It doesn't mean that they necessarily have the final say, right? You still have the final say as the matriarch, the patriarch, or combined, right? But together, the parents, let's say, make that decision. But now you're giving the financial education that I think even if you get it in textbooks at school, you need the real world. You need to see like, oh yes, I made $1 million, but I also paid this in taxes, and I also had these costs associated when you sell property. You have commissions and things like that. So you kind of see all this as like, okay, now I have much less left over, right, because of this, and that's okay. But now you understand the mechanics behind it, so you're better prepared for when the eventuality happens. You're able to do those things. I think that's really interesting.
But the other thing I would caution, especially people in their 70s who've accumulated $50 million of real estate, and it's all over the place, is if you have children, if your spouse, you should really start having meetings with them, start educating them about it, telling them a list. Here's where my properties are, and find a child who's willing to at least come into the office a little bit to just learn the day-to-day mechanisms, because I've seen it so many times where they don't even know where what I call the treasure map is. And if they find it, they just know, okay, it's somewhere in the backyard. Now they got to go dig up the backyard when they could have just created, here's how you get to the treasure, and it's right there, and communicate. But I've had so many times where an estate planning attorney or a wealth advisor introduces me to clients and their siblings, and they're bickering over what to do with the real estate. And I look at them, I go, you should just be thankful. Your father worked 40, 50 years, created this real estate, and you are the beneficiaries of this, and you're fighting. That is so, take a step back. I almost say, get on your hands and knees and thank your dad for this. And they just, well, so-and-so wants to do this, and I want to do that. And the problem was there was no clear-cut succession plan or, that was established. And the kids are just, figuring out what to do. So, always think, try to think 10 years ahead. That's what I'm always trying to help my clients is don't just look at today. You got to look really further out and figure out what the implications are, because we don't live forever.
Absolutely. And I think, having estate, it's difficult because most people avoid it. They don't want to talk about that. So having those estate plans and having that, and even something as simple, I had a wise attorney who told me many years ago, you put a letter in your nightstand that says open in case of death, and so you might have had an estate plan and you might have had all those things, but now this letter has, here are all the bank accounts, here are all the properties, here are all the things that you need to know, ATM code, I don't know, whatever, bank secret code if you bank in Switzerland. I don't, but apparently people do. And so you have these different little things that then they have better than a treasure map, because they have real breadcrumbs that they follow. They maybe don't know where the deed is stored and all of that, but at least they know we own this property or we have a bank account, at, whatever, Midwestern Mutual. I don't know if that's a bank, but
Yeah.
I just made up, oh, I didn't know. We don't live anywhere in the Midwest. Why do we have an account in Midwest? Why did Dad have an account in Midwestern Mutual?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
I
and
tell
so,
my clients set up folders, but and then have flash drives, but with the real estate, so you have like your purchase and sale agreement when you bought it, who your lender is, copies of your leases, copy of your insurance policy, bank accounts, who your, and then who your contact people are at the bank for your insurance. I mean, because I've known so many people saying, we don't even know really who the insurance agent is. We don't know what the insurance is, and it's just so many just simple things that you know somebody who's really good knows I've got to have a book for each property, and they create them. But there's a lot of mom and pops that it's somewhere. I had a client, he everything was chronological. So he had a file on every property, and he said, "Oh, when I bought it, that's going to be where the purchase," and then it was just, you go forward to future, and it was just like, oh my God, So you don't even have, if you had to find a tenant lease, well, when was the lease done? Oh,
oh yeah, that would be. I mean, that would be good if it was under each property at least, because
yeah,
then you'd be able to, But yes, I could see that across everything.
yeah,
It would be extremely tedious and time consuming.
yeah.
Shifting gears, you talked a little bit about land use, and I think a lot of people say that you buy land, there's not a lot more, they're not making more of it, and the benefit of doing re-entitlements or
Hmm.
getting approved plans and maybe selling deals is uh, shovel ready. Can you talk a little bit about that and your experience in that, and maybe some things that either maybe even smaller investors maybe haven't considered that they might want to think about?
Well, I can speak to, like, for California, they've changed a lot of they've had assembly bills. So technically, there is no longer what we would call like a single family lot. So everybody, if they have the space, they can go add an additional dwelling unit. Maybe they can do a lot split. They can then sell off the rear lot, and it's all to create housing. But the real key is I always tell people you're looking at a vacant piece of property. Okay, go to the city, find out what the highest and best use is, figure out what that's going to be, and then you've got to really engineer it. And I've had, when I was lending, so many people coming and saying, I'm buying this property, I'm going to build a 16 unit apartment building. And then I go, great, what are your costs? What are your rents? And I go, let's do a residual land analysis and find out that they're paying too much money for the land. Because, and that's where I think people, misunderstand the opportunity is just because there's a piece of property and it could be Maine and Maine, if the seller is thinking this is what it's worth and he doesn't want to accept a lower price and you go ahead and buy it, it's going to be hard to get somebody else to underwrite that because they're going to look at how am I going to really get a decent return if you're paying too much money for the land. But the the sad part is you got to get your entitlements. It does take a long time. So I think people also forget what the cost of carrying the money is. So if you put $100 down on a piece of land, and you got to spend $100 to get it entitled, is it a year process? 18 years? In California, people sue if they don't like what it is, and they'll sue against the environmental impact report and saying, oh, it didn't cover the traffic analysis properly, or it didn't cover this, and then you're now in a lawsuit. So there's a lot of risk in land. But I remember when I first started doing land use consulting, that was when mini storages were starting to boom. And people were buying land and then just putting mini storages on because they were land banking. And then they said, oh, I could put these on. Oh, and look at this. They're they're really depreciable. So I'm going to get great tax benefits. And oh, lo and behold, people actually want to rent these things. And then their decision is this is a cash cow. And forget about lamb, it's still lamb baking, but it becomes a cash cow. And then eventually they got to sell it because they've really depreciated the asset too far. And then, they get a lot of money and then they go find something else. But I remember a number of my clients were, buying land and just putting on the self-storage facilities because they didn't know what else to do with it, and turned out it was a great decision on their part. So sometimes you think what you're going to do with a piece of property, and then an alternative is just as good. So you got to keep yourself a little flexible sometimes with what you think you're going to do with a piece of property.
Absolutely, yeah, and yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. The timing is a big one. Uh, you talked a little bit about self storage, mini storage. There's lots of, even now I'm seeing with and I think that's, with the retail thing, I've seen that a lot of that business case of people going and buying the big box and just redoing and bringing it, and they're doing their business plan is build it, do the first floor, rent it out, sell it, and leave room for someone to go and put a second floor in because they're big box, so they have the ability to do that, but without going with the cost. It gives them some room for them to grow. So there's not just selling the asset for what it's worth today, but for the potential that it has. So I think there's some good things there. And you touched, you touched on the big one for me, which is the ADUs or the additional dwelling units, or the abilities to do that. It amazes me that where we are today, because there's a lot of the not in my backyard and all of those things, but there's really this. I think this need, and I talk to people again. I said all over the country. So California has one, Virginia is another, where they are now allowing folks to do that as part of by right, as from the state legislature coming down and saying you must allow this. That's amazing. I live in Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County has said you could do that as long as you are not in a city, right? Or as long as this you're allowed the 100% to do this. By right in unincorporated Miami-Dade County. The individual municipalities, which there are a number of them in South Florida and Miami-Dade County, they're the ones, the onus is on them now to go and match that. But it would be great for the state to come out and say, here are the rules, right? You still must meet lot coverage, whatever, basic things. But I think there's a benefit to everyone, right? There's the homeowner who has aging parents, or the aging parents who have the need for a caretaker, right, to live there and be able to offer that as part of the compensation of here's a place for you to live that's yours, and now take care of us because we need nursing and things, and I want to stay in my home, right? I don't want to go to an assisted living facility. So there's all these things, but it's going to get more people into more housing options, which in the long term, right? It's not a short term fix because it takes time for these things to be built. But I think that there's really an opportunity there. I think there's really a benefit there, but there's also an opportunity, which I keep to anyone who will listen who's in construction and these things. You need to go to your individual jurisdictions and have pre-approved these 3 plans, and just be able to just copy paste this cookie cutter and just sell this to people, right? Here's your A, your B, and your C. Your A costs this, the B costs this, the C costs this. These are plans that we've already run by your jurisdiction. They've approved them. You just tell me when you want to start and give me a deposit, and let's go, right? And from a construction point of view, or from even a fix and flip point of view, okay, I'm going to buy this house. I'm going to add an ADU, which I already have this GC or whatever that's going to do this for me because they've got it, whether it's prefabbed or done on site, but they can do it quickly because they're generally small. And then now I've added more square footage. What is that? Comps are price per square foot, and now I'm getting more money for my thing. On top of the fact that I have the added benefit of someone, a young couple who now went from a home being or an area being unaffordable. I can now rent this out, use that income to qualify, right? I think Fannie Mae does like 80%, so
Yes.
you can do that and apply for it. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity there.
And when I talk with a lot of people, they're looking at building an ADU in their backyard, but then moving their elderly parents into that, then renting out the front home. And then they feel like, okay, they've got a family now that kind of is almost attached to watching for their elderly parents. But now they're maybe on a one-story, small, 800 square foot additional dwelling unit, and then they're not having to maintain, and now they're getting still the income from now renting out a home. So there's a lot of different strategies that people use for that. But one of my bigger borrowers at one time, and this is what people should be looking at if they're fix and flippers, he was buying these older homes around USC, and then he was completely gutting them, and they were large enough, and he'd build an additional dwelling unit in the back, but he would gut the house and put in small bedrooms. So he'd take a small, 3 bedroom with a living room and a kitchen and make them into 4 units with a larger bathroom and then a kitchenette, and then rent them out almost by the room. And then the same thing with an additional dwelling unit. And it provided a lot more units for the university to rent out. And at one point he was turning around saying, "Do you want to just lease my all my homes from properties from us, and you can rent them out?" The university didn't want that, but he now had parents signing on these leases for a full year, and getting so to me, if somebody's shrewd, start looking around universities, a lot of older homes, see about redeveloping them, converting them into bedroom counts instead of just a home, and looking at it from that perspective instead of just I'm going to fix it up and rent it as just a single family home. So depending upon the neighborhood, you may look at different type of options of what you could do with the property.
Absolutely, yeah, I've seen that. I've seen the medium term, the midterm rentals. I've seen the rooms in general, right? I've seen even with not even going as far as building them out as individual units, even with like, here's a master, try to do as many master suites, but if you have a shared bathroom, here's a list of rules, you share it, here's a 3-month commitment. For outside of universities, right? Universities obviously
Yeah.
win-win, but
Yeah.
because there's a need, and it's short, or it's 3-4 years in nature, some cases 5, but there's this need for students to just find a place to
Yeah.
live, but there's also, even outside, like you said, what's another way that this deal could go? And this is already something that's already built. Well, I could rent out the rooms. I could rent out the whole unit, I don't know, the whole home for $3,000, but if I rent out the rooms, I could maybe rent them for $1,500, and there's 5 bedrooms. Now the math is in your favor, right?
Yeah.
Because now with 2 rented, you're covering, and the extra are now additional income, and it's helping you with vacancy as well. So and it's a more attractive asset as well for selling, right? For
Yeah.
the sale. Because people are looking at cap rates. What's my return? How much money am I getting out of this at the end of the
Yeah.
day? And that's where the true value comes.
Yeah. It's interesting. You touched on, just mentioned cap rates. And when I first started doing my small syndications, I had a partner. He was my mentor. And we were looking at cap rates. And he said, "Oh, we need to get a 5 cap." And I go, this 4 cap projecting out is going to return more money than the 5 cap. And you've got to do, a discounted cash flow, make sure your assumptions are right. But I've seen so many people who are just cap rate sensitive that they go out and they're saying, "I'm going to buy this property because it's a 5 cap. And this one's like a 4.25." And I'm going, that's short-sighted. You've got to really look at the real long term and do a real deep analysis of it, and do a discounted cash flow for both properties, because sometimes geography, location, the type of asset. You know, I'd rather take a more conservative property because I know my cash flow going forward is going to be stronger, more reliable and dependable than if I'm taking, getting something because, oh, today's cap rate is a higher cap rate. And I think investors miss that a lot. And, they just are, I got it for a 6.5 cap. And I'm going, oh, great, And I think people miss that, that understanding. It's just not the cap rate.
It's one of those measurements. It's one of those gauges you use, but it's not the only one. You're right, and I think we talked about earlier about looking at 5, 10 years in the future. That's where you have to start thinking. Where is this going to be in 10 years? Oh, I'm not going to hold it for 10 years. Okay, but if you had to hold it for 10 years, because you never know, or you decide to hold it for 10 years, where is it going to be? Does it make sense in that horizon? Right? Maybe not exactly 10 years, but you might end up with it for 8, you might end up with it for 12, but you have this idea of more or less this is where this is going to wind up, and you're not just kind of making what's cool, what's interesting right now. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. Well, Bruce, it's been a true pleasure speaking with you. I try to keep these not longer than 40 minutes, but we're over, but that's all right. It's been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't cover that you'd love to share?
I just think if you're starting out, my advice always is stay local if you can, because that's your what you know the most. Be able to visit your properties. Don't be an absentee landlord. Because I know so many people now who invest and they're saying, oh, real estate's location, location, location. No, they are absentee landlord, long story. That's what they're looking for. So people will go out of their, oh, I'm going to go 3 hours, or I got to fly to a property because I can get a really good deal. But they don't understand, you still have to manage the asset. And I remember still my first job as an asset manager, I flew out to Louisville, and it was a 56 unit apartment building, and the rent roll said there were 40 units rented. So I wanted to see what the condition of all the vacant units were. Well, some of them were occupied. And then be able to have to go in and fire a property manager in Louisville, and you're in Los Angeles, and say, now what? But so you can't be an absentee landlord. You've got to be able to visit the property. You got to check on it. I have a client now. He owns a 7-Eleven in Phoenix. It's in its 19th year, and he gets letters from the city. You're not maintaining the driveway. You're not maintaining the landscaping. And he goes, well, what do you mean? It's the tenant's responsibility. And I said, no, your tenant's not renewing its lease after 20 years, and so it's not spending money. And you got to now enforce this. When was the last time you went to the property? I never went. I bought the property as an exchange, and so.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's true of every business, but especially in real estate, you gotta. It has to be something that you either plan to be there, if it's not somewhere where it's directly local to you, or a place that you already spend time in. But you definitely do have to keep a watchful eye, or have a team in place, right? When you grow, you have a team, but if it's just you, it's really hard to do that.
Yes.
So, great words of advice, Bruce. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Michael.
Great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Okay.